All right, go.
All right,
Yay.
So hello everyone. Welcome to this very special edition of Personal Finance for the Real World. Today we will be talking about personal finance and social justice, which is a great and very important thing to think about and think through, especially as we're talking about how to steward our money well and honor others in that. So I am so excited to welcome our special guest today, Diamond Walton. So let me just pull up her bio here and tell you a little bit about Diamond. So Ms. Walton has spent her career pursuing community-led solutions to public health challenges. She has worked alongside community members to mobilize financial, social, and human capital to address social determinants of health, such as transportation, built environment, and access to health care. She is interested in how income and wealth function as social determinants of health and how reducing the racial wealth gap contributes to improved health outcomes. So yeah, I'm so excited to introduce Diamond to you all. And I'm so excited as well that you all are present, and I'll give it now to Diamond to take it away.
Thank you so much, Grace. And let me share my screen real quick. Okay. All right, we're all set. So yes, thank you everyone. Hello, and thank you for being here this afternoon. I want to say a special thank you to Theological Horizons. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Christy, for inviting me to speak. And Grace, thank you for coordinating the logistics. I know that is unseen work, but very much appreciated. As Grace mentioned, my name is Diamond Walton, and I graduated from UVA in 2009, or 09, as my classmates and I like to say. I was a psychology major and a religious studies minor, and I distinctly remember wanting to take one of the only personal finance courses taught for undergraduates at the time. It was taught by a former professor, Corinne Bonding. Yeah, I believe that she's presented at Theological Horizons before, but it seemed like the course was completely booked every time it was opened up to non-commerce students. And I share that story because I feel like it's indicative of my experience with personal finance generally. I've had a deep interest in money management since I was in high school. And, I sought resources and guidance, but often, they were either inaccessible or they weren't really relevant to my family's experience or my personal experience with money. So, that was one of the reasons why I started LPO Social Capital. But I do want to learn a little bit more about you and some of the social justice and social issues that are really pressing and what you're passionate about. So I'm going to put up a poll and I'm going to give you a minute to respond so we can get a sense of what brought you to the discussion today. There we go. So if you wouldn't mind just quickly going to slido.com and on your phone or website browser and typing in that code and putting in a few of the issues that are either you've experienced personally or other folks are having, are struggling with that brought you to the discussion today. And it should populate as you input your responses, though. When we see some of that. And I can do this as well. You guys started putting it in. Oh, there we go. Yay, it worked. I was telling Grace, I was like, I don't know about this. Nice, yeah, okay. So you see my issue is the racial wealth gap, environmental justice, health equity, child labor, that's a huge one, and supply chains, poverty among youth. Yeah, this is great. And I think I'll touch on quite a few of these, but it's good to know what you all are thinking about when you're thinking about social justice issues and how your personal finances can impact that. So, okay, thank you for participating. All right, so I always have to start with a disclaimer. So before I jump into the presentation. So, I want to share a couple of important things. So first, I want to emphasize that all the views that I share this afternoon are my own and those of Elpida Social Capital. And, I'm not here representing any other organizations I'm affiliated with. And also the second important disclaimer is that I am not an investment advisor or a certified financial planner or any finance professional that needs to register with the Security or Exchange Commission in order to offer financial advice. So I'm a financial educator, and I offer information to support you as you manage your own finances, and hopefully that in a way that aligns more with your values. So don't sue me. That's in a nutshell. Okay, let's talk about Elpida, which is my little baby, my third little baby. I have two little babies, and this is my third one. So in 2019, I was still working in the public health sector. So you notice when Grace read out my bio, I have a background in public health. And in 2019, I had been working in the sector for about a decade. And, I love the work. I was really passionate about it. I still consider myself a public health professional, but over time, I started noticing this really unsettling trend of minority and low-income communities regularly experiencing the worst health outcomes and having a constant need for public health interventions. And so, I thought more about this pattern, and I started noticing that, these communities were often experiencing years of underinvestment in public goods like roads and water systems and, public buildings like libraries and schools. And they also had less access to safe green spaces or healthy grocery stores, and sometimes had struggling small business communities. And, though community members expressed concerns about this lack of investment and the associated health impacts, they often did not have the power or the resources to really mobilize movement and investment around these issues. So, as I was reflecting on my faith and how that intersects with my vocational calling, I really felt, and I still feel that, I feel a moral obligation to listen and to believe folks when they say they're sick, and when they say their family members are sick, and when they say that their communities are literally falling apart. And though, they see the potential in what their communities could be, but they're tired of constantly trying to have to convince those with power and wealth to invest in their communities while simultaneously being sometimes blamed for the lack of investment. So, wrestling with this discomfort for about a year, I realized I needed to work in finance, and I wanted to mobilize wealth and power toward historically underinvested communities. But, I just shared, I do not have a background in finance. I'm a psych and religious studies major with, public health sprinkled on top. So, I had many conversations with folks in the finance sector, lots of coffees, lots of informational interviews with folks that worked in the impact investing field. That's a field that I'm working in now. And I decided to start small. So I launched Elpida in the summer of 2019. I began to coach folks. I offer financial coaching services. So I began to coach folks in my network to, one, not be afraid of their finances, because I noticed that a lot. And then two, how to start using their personal finances in a way that more aligned with not only their financial goals, but the world that they wanted to live in. And, I love coaching. I love meeting one-on-one with folks, but I still had this urge and desire to work more directly on closing the racial wealth gap. And in the poll, I shared that that's the social justice issue that is really important to me. So in 2019, Elpida launched the Black Student Debt Freedom Fund, and we paid down $25,000 worth of student loan debt for 2 Black graduates, and donated 1 year of free financial coaching to each gift recipient, which was great, but still the racial wealth gap is immense. And so I'm in the process of transitioning the Black Student Debt Freedom Fund into something I think can be more impactful. So stay tuned for an announcement on that front. But, as you can see on the slide, Elpida is Greek for hope, and hope is my favorite word. We named our daughter Esperanza, which means hope. And it really is at the heart of everything I do with Elpida. The financial system, to put it plainly, it really does not treat communities of color very, very well. And this has serious implications for our well-being. And but there's still hope. There's hope for a different and a better future. And my goal is to leverage Elpida the best that I can to get us there, to help get us there. So all right. So make sure here's an overview. So this afternoon, we're going to cover 3 main points. First, we're going to talk about personal finance in context, and here we're going to talk about the history of personal finance. Who is this industry for? What and how does it impact people who are trying to engage with personal financial resources and advisors today? Then we'll move to the social justice implications. So this is what you came here for. After we get some context, we'll move to talk about how personal finance is not personal and how when we manage our money, it has much broader implications than what we see reflected on our bank account or bank statement. And then finally, after we are thoroughly depressed and frustrated, we'll talk a little bit about hope. We'll move to hope. We'll move to Elpida. And we'll wrap up with getting really concrete and discuss some specific ways we can manage our finances in a more socially conscious way. You see that I have some polls, so I'll be sprinkling some polls and surveys throughout the presentation. It will be on the same platform, so you can keep that website up, and the poll will change once I get to that slide. And you're welcome to input your comments and questions in the chat, and Grace may pipe up every once in a while if she sees some questions, and I can answer those as we go along. So I also plan to hold like 8 to 10 minutes at the end of the presentation for us to have an open space for question and answers and dialogue. And I know there are folks on the call who know a lot about this topic as well. So would love to hear from you and have some space to dialogue a bit. Pregnant pauses after my thing. Okay, so we're going to begin with some background on the personal finance industry. I know you all didn't come here for a history lesson, but I recognize that the historical context really illuminates trends and helps us make sense of certain social problems and why they have become entrenched. But before we talk about where personal finance came from, I want to do another anonymous poll. So you can pull the Slido website up again. And if you wouldn't mind selecting the personal finance topics that you engage with regularly. So, not necessarily things that you've heard about, but things that you have familiarity with and you engage with a topic, right? You have a bank account or you are actively budgeting or things like that. So go ahead and select as many as apply, and we'll see where everyone falls. All right, lots of budgeting. That's good. Okay, sure. Nobody in the estate planning part, but that makes sense with the demographics of this population. So, okay, good. So it looks like, let me move my video so I can see the percentage. 100% have a bank account. We've got about 86% both are budgeting and managing their taxes, about half or a little over half is insurance, and 43% in retirement planning. Okay, great. That's helpful to know. Awesome. Okay, so at its core, personal finance is the mission of the industry really is to help individuals and families manage their household finances and achieve certain financial goals. And the most common financial topics are things that I listed in the poll. So you've got your budgeting and investing, insurance, taxes. But these topics like budgeting, for example, they seem really straightforward and just a matter of being diligent about how you spend and save. But if you examine them closely, you see that depending on a person's race or culture or gender or family wealth, they really have different experiences with the personal finance industry. And we're going to explore the history behind why these various personal finance topics impact people differently. And we'll start understanding why we have these different experiences. So let's start with budgeting. There we go. So, as you know, budgeting, everyone here has a budget, which is great. Good job, everybody. Not everybody has a budget, and people are afraid of the B word. But, budgeting is a process of monitoring and managing your spending and saving. And this, of course, is just to make sure that you can cover your expenses and move toward your financial goals. And there are plenty of blogs and books and apps to help you budget. But what I found is that some of my clients, it really doesn't matter how great they are at budgeting. There are still times when it is so hard to cover expenses and achieve goals that they have been working toward for years, like buying a home. And it's not because they're lazy or they're crazy, or they don't have the right spreadsheet, or they're not following the snowball method the right way. But, all of these tactics are no match for a financial system that makes maintaining a budget a challenge for the average person. So, here are a few reasons why. Let's start with banks. So most advice around maintaining a budget assumes that you have a bank, and all of us here do. So that's a bank account, and that's great. But however, according to a 2019 FDIC study, so that, as I'm sure many of you know, the FDIC is the insures deposits at many banks in the country, and they conducted a study in 2019 that showed that around 7 million households are unbanked, which means that they don't have a checking or a savings account. And that's a lot of people. And that's 7.1 million households. That's not people. There are more people who are unbanked likely. And if you're not affiliated with an institution that can help you monitor your financial transactions, it's going to be hard to budget. And the truth is that there are many good reasons why people do not have bank accounts. It includes the fact that historically banks have discriminated against certain populations. And even now that all folks are able to get a bank account, there still is an alarming rate of discrimination in banking services and products. For example, we can just point to the subprime mortgage lending crisis in the early 2000s that targeted communities of color and low-income communities. Another reason budgeting can be challenging is because, when the numbers just don't work sometimes. Ideally, our income exceeds our expenses and we are able to save and invest the difference. But unfortunately, that's not the reality for many families. And again, in 2019, the US Census Bureau reported that 13 million US workers have more than one job. And that's nearly double the folks without a bank account. So the majority of these workers are women. And this trend reflects the historic pay gap between men and women, resulting in the need to take on additional work to make ends meet. And these 13 million Americans are clearly hard workers. They're working multiple jobs, but I imagine that sticking to a budget is challenging, and it's not because of a lack of trying. Now, we've all been there. Our income doesn't not cover our expenses, so we turn to debt. And debt can be a form of payday loans, credit cards, personal loans, various forms of lending. And we do this for a number of reasons. We want to make sure that we don't fall behind on our bills, which could have an impact on our credit score, which is important for our financial health, or because we think that the debt will allow us to get ahead. So in the example of student loan debt, we take that on with the hopes that with a college degree, we'll be able to be higher income earners. And whatever the reason is, Americans are swimming in debt. And last month, CNBC reported that over the past 2 years, median income fell 3%, while the cost of living rose 7%. And so this also harkens back to the last statistic that I shared around the fact that, there are millions of Americans that are working multiple jobs. And the increase in cost of living over the past few years has been really connected to the rise in housing costs. So if folks have been looking at the housing market, it is pretty crazy. The cost of real estate now, as well as the increase in cost of medical expenses. And so it is folks, their expenses have risen and their income has not met that. So folks are really having a hard time. And they are in turn taking out more debt. So the average US household owes about $155,000, and combined, the US households hold $15 trillion in debt. And that's quite a bit of debt. So that includes the whole gamut, the credit cards, mortgages, student loans, and other household obligations. And throw in inflation, and that really does not help much. So it's no wonder that budgeting tricks don't always work. And I am not saying don't budget. Please budget. Please monitor your expenses and monitor your money habits. But what I am saying is that if you find it hard to budget, it's not in your head, and it's not because of, solely because of individual decisions you're making, but also because of how accessible or inaccessible financial services are, how well your employer compensates you, or it could be connected to your family wealth and that contributing to your need to take on debt, certain debt products like student loans. Okay, so now we'll talk about investing. So investing is something that, once you figured out your cash flow, you figured out your budget, you're ready to invest. And this is a topic that many folks feel like they should know more about, but their entry point often is either through their retirement account or through apps like Robinhood, where they can buy a single stock of a company. I like this timeline. I took this from Ally Bank, and it does a pretty good job of hitting on key milestones in the evolution of the investment industry in the US. You will see in 1792, so early in our country's history, they have listed there the Button Tree Agreement. And this is something you probably have never heard of. I hadn't heard of it either before my research. But it's really the basis of the New York Stock Exchange, which is one of the biggest exchanges in the world. And this Buttonwood Agreement was put together because early in the country's history, you all, I'm sure, have seen Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton was tasked with setting up the nation's first banks. It was a brand new country. These are brand new institutions. There were two banks. There's one in Philadelphia, and the bank that Alexander Hamilton was setting up was in New York. And in the process of setting up these banks, folks were definitely taking advantage of the fact that the policies and the market was not as regulated. And so at some point, folks were really losing a lot of money. And there was a run on the banks in 1972, and folks were really losing faith in the financial system. And so in that same year, a group of 24 men, they were all men, and they were well-holding men, got together and composed this agreement so that they would exchange and trade exclusively with each other within these certain boundaries, these common rules and boundaries around how much they charge in terms of fees and the nature of these trades. And this, of course, was a very exclusive club. And so the wealth, the companies and industries that were being invested in through this exchange were, producing their profits from the common cash crops of that time, as cotton and sugar and tobacco. And I'm sure you all are aware that those profits were coming because these companies were using free labor of enslaved Africans. And so this group of folks were able to grow and generate wealth and create a system off of kind of an inflated profits because they were not compensating workers, they had enslaved laborers. And so this is really the foundation of the investment system of our country. It's fairly exclusive. It has been built to by folks who have wealth, and so the rules were set to be able to continue to grow that wealth. It also has benefited from labor that was not compensated. And so, if you feel that the investment infrastructure or this topic is unapproachable, that's understandable because the context in which it was developed and grown. And also it can also feel hard to reconcile the need to save for entire retirement in, the stock market and invest in the stock market, and also have some conflicting feelings around, how the system was developed and how exclusive it can feel. And you can also see that exclusivity as you look on the timeline, because in 1952, only 4% of Americans had stocks. So that wasn't that long ago, and that is a very small percentage of Americans. So it shows how exclusive this sector has been. And they go all the way up to 2021, where over 50% of Americans own stock. And many of us had our first exposure to investing, the average person, through our employer in our retirement savings accounts. And that kind of opened up this sector to the average American, but still there are many workers that do not have employers that offer those benefits, a 401k, which is, a whole history of why that's connected to employment. But so that's really where people have been exposed to investing in the stock market. So again, stocks and bonds are not the only way to invest. You can invest in real estate, you can purchase equity in startups through platform regulation crowdfunding platforms, or you can try, if you are brave or really want to take a risk, you can invest in cryptocurrencies or NFTs. But the important thing is that when you choose to invest, it's good to take some time to understand who is impacted by this investment, where did this, form of investing come from and who benefits, and in addition to what return would you make if you invest in this way. Okay. So, oh goodness. I don't love these slides. Okay, so I'm going to quickly talk about insurance. Everyone knows it's important to have insurance, and in some cases it's required by law. So whether we're talking about health or car or rental or home insurance or life insurance, the purpose of the policy is to cover a large or unexpected expense, like a tree falling on your car, like what happened here in this photo. And it seems like a very straightforward financial product. But we run into challenges when we really look into, who historically has had access to this product and when they do, what their experience is with the product. So, if we go back to the founding of our country, there were insurance firms around, and some of very familiar insurance firms, large ones like New York Life, AIG, and Aetna, they sold policies that ensured slave owners would be compensated if their slaves they owned were injured or killed. And so that meant that each month, these insurance companies were being paid by slaveholders and generating profits and collecting premiums. Obviously, they would pay out if, the slaveholder filed a claim that their slave was injured or killed, the enslaved person was injured or killed. But in the meantime, these insurance companies were profiting off the fact that folks were being treated as property, as assets, human beings. And though, Black people are no longer considered property or assets upon which owners can take out policies, and we are now able to acquire assets such as homes and take out our own insurance policies. I'm reminded of my great-great-grandmother. Her name was Mary E. Jones Parrish. And over 100 years ago, she fled North Tulsa with her daughter as it was burned to the ground, the Greenwood District, in the Tulsa Race Massacre. And it was horrific. She actually wrote an account of her survival and the survival of her neighbors. The book is called A Nation Must Awake. And it was just a terrible, terrible event in U.S. history. But what came out of after the massacre was over, and the Black residents came back to their community to kind of try to figure out how to rebuild. Many of them had insurance policies on their buildings, on their companies, on their homes, and there were some Greenwood residents who were unable to get their insurance claims paid on this destroyed property, so they filed these lawsuits. And of 96 lawsuits that were filed against 30 insurance companies, 76 were dismissed, and 20 didn't have documentation of the outcome to, warrant to pursue the lawsuit. And this is according to Oklahoma Historical Society records. And the reason why these lawsuits were thrown out is because insurance companies were falling back on this exclusionary clause that prevented payouts for particular claims. And the policies that the clause that the insurers were leaning on was that they were not held liable for loss caused directly or indirectly by invasion, insurrection, riot, civil war, commotion, military, or usurping of power. And in the 1920s, it was very common for Black communities to be destroyed and property stolen. And even if they had insurance policies, they were not able to payment for the damages because it wasn't covered technically. And though this policy is not explicitly racist, it doesn't say, because you are a Black person and your business was destroyed, we will not pay your claim. But because the language was available for insurers to lean on, it was an easy out so that they didn't have to cover the damages. So, though overt discrimination has become less common in the insurance industry today, insurers have begun using proxies like credit scores or zip codes to determine how risky the insured would be and set differing monthly premium charges based on that risk. And the higher the risk, the higher the charge. And if you have a low credit score, you live in a zip code that has a higher concentration of poverty, then you may be deemed more risky and charged a higher monthly premium, which again brings us back to a systemic reason where it could be harder to maintain a budget. If a larger chunk of your budget is going toward paying a car insurance premium that is higher than another person that lives in a zip code, a neighborhood over. And that means there's less money that you can put towards your financial goals that you're working toward. So all these things kind of work together and build on each other. Okay, so I have been talking for a little bit, and I do want to cover the topic of taxes. And taxes are complicated. That's why I think many of us lean heavily on our on an accountant or some tax advisor to help us during tax season, which is upon us. But I wanted to allow a tax expert to explain some of the social justice implications of the US tax system. This is an interview of Professor Dorothy Brown. She is a lawyer and professor at Emory University School of Law, and she wrote a book called The Whiteness of Wealth. And I just bought it. I'm excited to start reading it. But I want you all to take a listen to her explain some research that she is putting forth in her book. And this is as it relates to marriage, like the implications of being married, whether you're white or Black, and the tax implications, as well as home ownership, depending on your race, the tax implications. So I will play a few minutes of this and jump back into my presentation.
What? Before World War II, the only people who paid taxes were rich white Americans. Basically, that's who paid taxes. And at this point, they paid taxes and they didn't like it, and they used their wealth to hire an attorney and challenge the law that required every person to file individually. So what we know of as the joint return didn't really exist back then. But they wanted to split their income. If the sole wage earner could have half of it taxed to his wife, that unit would pay less in taxes. They couldn't do it under the law, but then they sued. It went all the way up to the Supreme Court and they won. So because of the Seaborns, we have, there are other, but to make it simple, because of them, we got Congress in 1948 creating the joint tax return.
So why does that disadvantage Black people so profoundly and advantaged white people so profoundly? I think it's important to say both. Why is that?
So what the progressive tax system does is, let's take a household with $100,000 of income. If the wage earner makes $100,000, his last dollar of taxes is going to be taxed much higher. His last dollar of income is going to be subject to taxes much higher than his first dollar. In fact, when you earn $100,000, your tax bill is higher than if you earned $50,000. So what the joint return does is, in effect, allow the $100,000 household to be taxed like it only has $50,000. That's just a rough approximation, but it gives you a tax cut when you get married, because the stay-at-home spouse has no taxable income. Well, married Black couples need two incomes in order to get to $100,000.
Because with African Americans, it's more likely that both parties will work, right?
Exactly.
And it's also more likely that both parties' incomes will be about equal.
Exactly. And instead of being able to spread their income to a non-earning spouse, their income, in effect, is stacked on top of the other spouse, and they don't get a tax cut. The law was changed in 1969 such that not only did married Black couples not get a tax cut the way single wage earner white couples did, but their taxes actually increased, and they paid a marriage penalty as a result of the tax law. So the Seaborn still got a tax cut, but my parents, the Browns, wound up paying higher taxes.
You know what gets me about this is that for decades now, conservatives have been haranguing Black people around marriage, right? Mostly white conservatives, but also some Black conservatives, haranguing Black people about their marriage rates, saying, oh, well, see, if you would only get married and do things the right way, then you would prosper. It's your behavior. And what you're saying is that even when you do things the right way, you actually are penalized for it under the tax code.
That's absolutely right, because Black Americans cannot do marriage the way white Americans can. Like, we can't do home ownership the way white Americans can.
Well, talk to me about home ownership. Tell me about that. Like, why is that another example where the tax code disadvantages some people and advantages others? Because I think, again, buy a house, be a citizen, get your pennies together, get your coins together, buy a house, be stable.
So I want to talk about just the tax subsidies for home ownership. So there are two so everybody knows about the mortgage interest deduction, but I want to focus on two other provisions. One that occur when you sell your home. So if you're married and you sell your home for gain, up to $500,000 of that gain can be received tax-free. But when you sell your home for a loss, there is no tax break associated with the loss. So you say that shouldn't matter, because home ownership is the same whether you're Black or white, and it is not. In fact, where is the most appreciation in homes? It is found in all white neighborhoods, or almost all white neighborhoods. Where do most Black homeowners live? In racially diverse neighborhoods or all Black neighborhoods? So Black homeowners are, one, less likely to sell their home for a gain because the market doesn't value their homes the way the market values homes in all white communities. As bad as that is, it gets worse when we look at losses.
So you can see that Professor Brown is talking about multiple elements of the tax system, how it impacts folks based on their race. And as we were discussing earlier in the presentation, the difference in experience of the wealth that families have and their ability to access certain resources is not, race is a social construct, so it's not directly resulting because someone is a certain race, but it is because of historical systems and structures that have set folks up to live in certain areas, to have certain amounts of wealth, and to have certain family structures. So when she refers to the tax code benefiting families that, though it is a married couple, but there's only one wage earner, that is a situation that culturally is not as likely to happen in a household of color because of the need to have two wages, because of historically not having the wealth to live off of one wage, and historically employers not necessarily compensating workers of color comparable to their white counterparts. And so it's important to just consider that things as kind of stale and run of the mill as taxes are really nuanced when taking them under consideration the history of our country and the different cultural and structural setups of our families and our communities. So I want to do one more quick poll. If you wouldn't mind indicating how would you classify yourself in terms of your financial health? Currently, I know this could change. It can feel a certain way today versus a year ago. But if you wouldn't mind sharing, and then see what results pop up. Okay, good. So we've got a good amount of some financial coping and financially healthy. All right, thank you for sharing. I know that can feel a bit vulnerable. So, my objective of asking you to take that poll really wasn't to make you feel self-conscious about your financial situation, but it really was hopefully to show you that you're not alone in where you're at. And, if you feel vulnerable, that's understandable because, managing your finances is challenging as a young adult or as a person in general, because many of the reasons that I listed, but also, it's important, again, as I said, to just keep in mind the context in which you are trying to manage your finances. When I start my financial coaching relationships with clients, I have them start out with their money story. And the purpose of doing that is really so they have a sense of, how have they been socialized around money? What are their fears and anxieties about it, but also what's their family story as it comes to money? How did their caretakers interact with the topic, and what did they learn? And by couching our conversation about how they're managing their finances today in that history, just allows folks to just have, give themselves a bit more forgiveness or grace or space as they work toward improving their financial habits. And so I think it's helpful to just, one, know that, everyone is in different, spaces along the spectrum. You're not the only one. And you can see from this slide that, there are quite a few people who are either feeling financially vulnerable right now. This is from a report from the Financial Health Network that was put out last year. So about 35 million people are really struggling with their finances. Just over half of Americans are financially coping, and just over a third feel like they're in a good situation financially. And this doesn't cover in a report from, let's see, when was this? This was last year. The Minneapolis Federal Reserve reported that 50% of all adults have difficulty paying a $400 emergency expense. So that's and 19% of adults, so that's 1 in 5 are not able to pay that expense at all. And so in a time where we're in the middle of a pandemic and there can be unexpected medical expenses or a number of expenses popping up, it's really disconcerting to hear that amount of people are struggling financially. But over and above that, if you think about, as we're saving for our financial futures, around half of adults, according to the US Census, a survey they conducted in 2017, they have no retirement savings. And so if you think about the implications of this in the future, as folks do move toward retirement and don't have enough to cover their expenses in retirement, what does that mean for our country and our communities and how we support that population? So, I realize I need to keep my mouse moving, otherwise my little advancer disappears. Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about these social justice implications and go deeper here. So, you know, when I'm talking about social justice, I'm defining it as equal rights and equitable opportunities for all. And you know, I really believe that for me, this stems from how I view people, and I view them as being made in the image of God and deserving equitable treatment. And you know, I appreciate you all sharing the social justice issues that are important to you, because I see that, you know, it reflects that you have a deep appreciation for groups of people that you probably have never met, but really understand that there are things that you may do on a daily basis that have implications for these communities and even the planet. And I really encourage to continue that energy and to continue to use that lens as you consider implications of your finances, your financial management. So I'm going to touch a bit more on the issue that Elpida is really concerned about, and that is the racial wealth gap. You know, I am laser focused on this. This is really, once I really understood the extent of this gap, I just could not shake the desire to really work toward closing it. And you can see from the slide some of these alarming statistics. So according to a 2019 survey from the Federal Reserve, the US Federal Reserve, white families have the highest level of both median and mean family wealth. So you can see that listed here. And you can also see the median and mean wealth of Hispanic families as well. And you know, as we reflect on the history that I was sharing a bit about in the earlier slides, this is unsurprising that, you know, we've gotten to this level of wealth inequality. But the more alarming thing is that it continues to grow. And so as you think about the particular social justice issue that you're concerned about, it's important to not only have a sense of where it is now, but also, you know, where was it 10 years ago, and what is happening to cause this issue to worsen or improve, and really dig into that you of addressing the social justice issue as you're thinking about how you can leverage your personal finances to get you there. So there we go. Okay, so let's get toward the hope. We got 10 minutes to talk about some hope. Okay, so the first thing that's important to do is try to understand the system. I gave you a bit of a taste of some of the systemic reasons why certain industries are the way they are, why the banking industry is the way it is, why the insurance industry is the way it is, in terms of some of the social implications of how they are currently functioning today. And if there's a particular system that you are interacting with daily as it relates to your personal finances, try to get a sense of how they work, and how they work not just for you, but for other folks that may be more vulnerable and are engaging with these systems. So, you know, that is one of the very first steps. Obviously, I can't answer the question of how do we address every system possible today, but it is still, it's important context for figuring out what to do next. Here we go. Okay, so step number 2 is be a conscious consumer. And this is something I think quite a few of us are familiar with. You know, if you go shopping at any store, there are quite a few places that tell how they're organic or fair trade or something like that. And I think that that's helpful, but it's also good to think about a few other questions as you're trying to figure out how to purchase your goods and services. And some of those things are like, where are these things produced? Someone mentioned child labor, and that is a huge issue when it comes to supply chains for companies. So understanding that, when you're holding a shirt, it probably started out in multiple countries before it got to you in terms of the dye and the fabric and the labor to assemble that thing before it got to your door. And so having a sense of what the supply chain looks like for the company, what materials are used, how the company treats the communities that it operates in, how the company treat the employees and customers, gives you a general sense of how, the culture of the company and how it operates, and helps me to figure out, is this a worthwhile company to continue investing in and purchasing products and services from? All right. Okay, switch your bank. These are just a handful of headlines from lawsuits against big banks over the last few years. I know some of you may have heard about this lawsuit that has been brought forth by a Houston doctor that's suing Chase because she went there to deposit a $16,000 check, and they assumed that it was a fake check, and they were questioning her credentials as a physician and wouldn't allow her to deposit the money. And that's one person and one example. But some of these other headlines highlight patterns of fraud and discrimination that bring on these massive settlements that companies have to pay to compensate multiple customers and employees that have experienced discrimination in their companies and by their companies. And so a website that I use is called mightybanks.com or .org. I can't remember the ending, but it's one of those two. And it helps you sort and evaluate banks based on certain social issues or environmental issues. And it's helpful to just get a sense of what is the bank doing with your money while it's sitting there overnight, because they are definitely using it, but also, how does it impacting people in the community? Another step is, I believe it was the second to last. Take stock of your assets. So some of you mentioned that you have investment portfolios, but investments aren't just, your stocks. It could be if you own any real estate, but also if you're affiliated with an organization that has an endowment. You could be an alum of an institution, you could be a member of a church or a religious or national or international organization. You could be, connected to a community foundation. These are all organizations that have pools of money that they invest on a regular basis. And, as an affiliate of these organizations, there's an opportunity to speak into how they direct those investments. So even as you think about how you're managing your personal assets, also consider the assets within your network and how you can support those organizations and in managing them well. And the final step is advocacy. So many of the regulations that we are familiar with, whether that's the Fair Housing Act or Community Reinvestment Act, or all of these policies that require banks and require lenders and all the folks that are kind of part of this financial network to treat folks with respect and to not discriminate against them in the provision of their services, they came about because of activism and because of advocacy. Lots of work from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., from Coretta Scott King. She actually was responsible for the Federal Reserve, this is not a very well-known fact, the Federal Reserve not only monitoring, how well the country is doing in terms of, the money supply and inflation, but also employment And so it has a mandate to make sure that they maintain full employment so that folks who are willing and able to work have an opportunity to be employed. And so that type of advocacy work has really helped to not only allow people to acquire assets, but also to maintain an income and to grow wealth for their families. And so keep an eye out for local, state, national level, or even international level opportunities to advocate on behalf of others, and the impact of financial systems on their lives. And I think this is toward the Q&A section. There we go. So we don't have to do this on Slido. We can just go to the end since we have a few minutes left. But I do want to open it up for questions or just observations, or even if you have suggestions around things that you are currently doing that you think would be helpful for the group. I welcome that now. So here's my contact information if you'd like it, but I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can actually see you, and we can talk to each other for a few minutes. Okay. Oh, I'm just seeing the chat now. Okay. Oh, resources to learn more. Oh, that's a good question. It depends on the topic. Is there a particular topic you're thinking about, Karen?
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of personal choices like the banking, I just flipped over to Mighty Deposits, like even, which is helpful. But, just websites that you like or resources that you have on your own, blogs that you read, just a way to kind of start to wade in a little more deeply.
Yeah, that's great question. So yeah, in terms of banking, Mighty Deposits is really helpful. Also just considering credit unions or CDFIs, because the mission of the organizations are geared toward the community. And so if you can really get a sense of an organization's mission, and if they're operating consistent with that mission, then they're likely a good organization to be in business with. In terms of businesses, the closer you are to the end product, the easier it is to tell what's going on. So buying from local businesses, small businesses is great. And it also is more likely that you're going to be buying from someone who is doesn't necessarily come from wealth. So you could be supporting a minority or women-owned businesses. There are groups of businesses who are categorized as benefit corporations. There are now some public benefit corporations that you can invest in through your investment accounts, but benefit corporations are private companies that in their governance structure, they're required to make sure that they are benefiting people and the planet, as well as, running a profitable business. And asking questions. I mean, it's no one's ever going to be perfect. And I think a lot of companies are starting to learn that the customers expect clarity around their supply chains. They expect clarity around how they treat their employees. They expect clarity around pay discrepancies and things like that, pay disparities. So those are some places to start in terms of as a consumer. I think in terms of community investing, and their community development financial institutions, so CDFIs, are great places that even if you're affiliated with an entity that has an endowment or a larger pool of money, and they're trying to think about how to invest that money, having conversations with them about how they can connect with the CDFI so they can invest those funds directly into communities. And often CDFIs are, they're focused on affordable housing, they're focused on small business development, they're focused on workforce training. And so they have years of experience creating sometimes really complicated investment structures so that communities aren't exploited in the process of these investments happening in their backyard. So that's another good place to start too.
Thank you.
Diamond, can you elaborate on what a CDFI is for those of us who don't know?
Yeah, sure. So a certified community development financial institution it's a banking institution, and they are charged with investing in communities in ways that grow wealth and really ensure community flourishing. The federal government has a fund that is a CDFI fund, and they disperse grant dollars or usually debt dollars out to these CDFI networks. They're all across the country to really leverage sometimes to be the first investment in a community, and sometimes bring in other capital, so other private investments or other investments to encourage them to invest in communities that are historically underinvested. But in Virginia, there's a Virginia Community Capital is a big CDFI in Richmond, and there are a few smaller ones as well that focus on specific areas like farmers or the food system.
Diamond, this has been so helpful. I'm so grateful for your presentation. It was really, really informative. So I have a confession that I have been with Bank of America forever, and which I've always felt bad about. And for all the reasons you say, like, it's just, I mean, I even studied community economic development in seminary, and it's like, I love cooperatives and credit unions, but I've just never we've moved so many times and kind of been in a situation where it's not felt like easy to do. So I kind of need a little pep talk. And now my kids are starting to get bank accounts and credit cards. And I have almost made the switch a couple times, but I'm wondering, that website, Mighty Deposits, is really great. But I even wonder if do you have a couple of favorites, like a bank and a credit card, or a couple that you feel like make it really easy, like maybe even have perks and high yield savings to like get some bells and whistles.
Yeah, and I can preface this is not an endorsement or promotion. Right. I'm not paid promotion. But yeah, hey, you should not feel guilty. Nathan and I have had Bank of America for quite a minute. And we are just transitioning. And so the bank that we're transitioning to, it's called Amalgamated Bank. And they have high yield savings accounts. They have a network of, so one of the things that's challenging to change banks is you're like, well, what if I need to go to an ATM and there's going to be all these fees? And the reality is banks that are smaller, have a smaller network, they cover fees, ATM fees. And so, you know, it is a matter of figuring out what are those reoccurring payments and withdrawals from your account, and making sure that those are taken care of. But even if what we have done is we have opened up our new bank account and we're transitioning over, and then eventually we'll close the Bank of America account. I may keep the credit card because of the impact on credit score. But apart from that, I can get another credit card and start building up my credit history again, and that's fine. But it's nothing to be ashamed about or guilty about. I think it's very common, and I think that's what banks kind of bank on, is that you are so comfortable, it's so convenient, and because they have so many customers, they can create like user interfaces on their websites that are great, and like, you know, all these kind of perks that make you want to stay. And it's because they have the capital to do that. You know, they have the resources to do that. But that's what
that's really helpful. Okay, I've bookmarked that bank, Amalgamated Bank. What about credit cards? Because that's the other thing. We've had ours for so long that, of course, we're like stuck in at that great credit score and perks. Any credit cards that have you started researching those?
Well, credit cards are funny because they are affiliated with like Visa or MasterCard, these big credit card companies. And so you can switch your banks and still be working with those credit card companies, which is fine. I mean, I think those companies have been doing a lot of work in the last few years to make sure that they are trying to invest more in communities, and especially around social justice issues. So I think with the credit card, you aren't necessarily switching the company you're really working with. I mean, with Bank of, what happens with credit cards is when you use a credit card that has like the logo of a particular financial institution, and then at the bottom it's got Visa or MasterCard on it, the institution, so like your Bank of America, will get money each time you use the card. And so you'll see that there are some, they're called neobanks. They're basically online banks that have these credit cards that have their logo on it, and it's a Visa or MasterCard, and you use it and they make money from each transaction you make. So if you move banks and you get a different credit card, your transaction fee just goes to that new bank. But most of the profit is going to go to Visa or MasterCard. They kind of run that system, the credit card system.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
I'm keeping an eye on this Aspiration. I don't know if you've heard of Aspiration, but it's been one of my kids was recommending that, but I was like scared to make the jump.
Yeah, so Aspiration is a neobank as well. So they get a fee each time you make a transaction with their credit card. But the interesting thing with neobanks is also they're connected to an FDIC insured bank. So look into that as well. So what is the bank that Aspiration Bank is actually connected to? Because Aspiration is not a bank. And that's something I had to learn as well when I was researching some of these neobanks, because they have more kind of social justice, environmental justice themes. But I think I found it helpful also just to see like what is the actual bank that's backing them and insured, what is their story.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Diamond. I'm really grateful for your presentation. I think we all learned a lot today. So thank you so much. And could you drop your email in the chat just for anyone who's interested in finding out any questions?
Yeah, thank you for having me, and thank you for listening to me talk for an hour. Anybody who's interested, it's going to take a lot of us to make some movement in this area. So thank you for your interest.
Thank you. We're excited about sharing this too, Diamond. So we're going to archive this on our website.